start the launch sequence.
Countdown for liftoff, T-5.
Are your kids ready for life after school? Let's get them ready.
Mission control, we have liftoff.
Welcome to the launch sequence. I am Bill Priestley. This is a podcast you can find on your favorite podcast distributors, but now also in video form on YouTube at the Dream Job Factory, as we look to interview those individuals that can help you as parents figure out how to help your child figure out what they want to do in their life. In many ways, there is somewhat of an expected system of how high school students transition to the working world. For some, it's college. For others, it's trade school. For many, it's some college. And for the rest, it's straight into the workforce or possibly going into the military. However, as much as we would like to believe that the decision-making process is the same for everyone, there are differences in one area we're inclined to possibly ignore. And that's the difference between young men and young women and how they look at and making decisions around their future. Today, we have an interesting discussion with two people connected with the process of helping young people figure out what they want to do with their lives. Janet Weller, Director of College Counseling at Harpeth Hall School in Nashville, which is an all-girls school, and Colin Dunnigan, Director of College Counseling at Montgomery Bell Academy here in Nashville, which, as you can guess, is an all-boys school as well. Thanks so much for joining us.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you.
So let me start off with the easy question, and I know that it is hard to wrangle up girls and boys and try and get them to think about their future, but under ideal circumstances, Janet, let me just start with you. If you had your druthers, how would this process go from starting to talk about what happens after Harpeth Hall?
Well, you're right. That is a kind of a complicated question. And I should preface by saying each of the girls that I work with is very individual, and their separate paths might look very different from one another. But ideally, we begin the conversation by just the open-ended inquiry of what do you want to do next? What are your goals? In our office, we begin the college counseling process very lightly in ninth grade year with just informational meetings with students and families all together. And they get an individual college counselor in their sophomore year. And that's when we begin that sort of more individualized conversation. And so for a student, it may, I think Colin would agree with me, at both of our schools, it is fairly typical that students will consider four-year college their next step, but that's not the case in all environments. And so talking through with a student what their goals are, what their values are, what their hopes are for the future, I think is the natural starting point for that conversation. Like I say, most of my girls are, we were a college-going high school, and so the overwhelming majority, if not all of my students, will consider four-year college their next step. And so we just try to kind of early and often present their options in front of them and highlight their strengths so that they can have a good conversation with their college counselor and with their family about their future goals and plans.
Colin, what's under ideal circumstances, how would you see boys at NBA?
Very similarly to Harpeth Hall, where we are a college-going community. We are a school where the vast majority of our students are children of parents who went to college, in most cases, both parents. The number of first-generation students we have is exceedingly low. So the big question for our students is typically not, am I going to go to college, as our peers and other schools do? It's, where am I going to go? And like Harpeth Hall, we start that process lightly in ninth grade, and it builds from there. And we're both in enviable situations where we're able to construct planning from ninth grade on, where it's a very deliberate, well-orchestrated process for, in her case, girls, in our case, boys, to discover themselves, what they like, what they don't like, everything from testing to hopefully career and major planning involved in there. And as recently as yesterday, trying to make sure that boys are not choosing schools based on football which is a large driver in where our students look. And we're able to do that through the senior year through a very deliberate, well laid out process. So, in my satisfaction of how things work here, it's very high. But recognizing that it is an individual process. And while we have a lot of boys that will go to the same places, many will not and will end up choosing a path that they want because it is best for them and because they have the confidence to go to something a little bit different from what a bulk or a majority of their peers are doing. And that's exciting for us when we work with them.
That's great to hear there as well. So we've talked about the ideal scenario. Jen, how does it actually go?
So we are fond of reminding students and maybe more often their parents that this process is not linear. And Colin mentions having football be a driving factor in the decision making for boys. It comes up for girls as well. Not to play, obviously, but to be a fan. But I think sometimes families are concerned when the criterion that students are using in order to justify or outline their future plans does not line up with a more adult thought process. And that's the point where we need to remind ourselves that these are children. They may be older children and on the verge of adulthood. But they are still forming their thinking and their way of addressing the world, and the process can go a little haywire sometimes. That is why I think it's so important for the adults in a student's life to give them grace, but also to give them support and guidance. And so following that sometimes nonlinear path, sometimes that requires some real sit downs, some moments of reckoning where an adult needs to help clarify. But at the same time, I really think there's some value in listening to the students that we're working with. Sometimes buried in that nonlinear path or the gobbledygook of adolescent thinking is the kernel of truth that will really lead them to the right ultimate decisions. They just need to have adults around them that are willing to listen and guide simultaneously.
Colin, is it a linear path at MBA that isn't quite achieved?
Yeah, it's perfectly linear, and every kid in ninth grade knows exactly what they want to do, and it works out well for everyone. Everyone gets in exactly where they want, and they all get big scholarships. Yeah. I'm sitting here thinking first about my own path. I was that rare kid who knew he wanted to go into education, but I didn't know it until I was a junior in high school. I applied to 3 colleges, 2 of which made little sense for what I wanted to do. I didn't visit either of them. I went through the process like an idiot 17-year-old and had a college counselor. And our first college meeting was as the entire class of 1989 at Lake Hill Prep in July before our senior year. It's evolved in independent schools, and it has become an industry. And we try to make it as linear as possible and lay out exactly what should happen. But we're also dealing with the whims of 16, 17, and 18-year-old students and sometimes conflicting desires of parents. Mm-hmm. And the parent piece in there is very important. Number one, they're probably paying, and in some cases paying a substantial amount. I had a student with me just before coming here today talking about his college essay, and after next year, the family will have 2 students in college, and they will be looking at a bill of about $190,000 a year with those two schools, expensive private schools and no merit, no need-based aid. A shocking number. Our curves and turns and twists sometimes happen as late as June or July, with students who get off wait lists and all of a sudden a place becomes where they want to be. A lot of decisions are made around athletics and where a student might be able to play, where they might not be able to play. And there's a special fascination with being a Division I athlete in an SEC program. And we have very few boys who are going to make that dream become a reality. So we are always talking about other options and what it means to hedge. And we have a lot of students who want to work in business or finance. I say, okay, what does it mean to hedge? And they look at me funny and I say, you ever heard of a hedge fund? Yeah. Oh, you mean hedge your bets? Aha. So we talk about those possibilities that if door A doesn't open, you better like what's going to be behind door B and C. There's a reasonable chance you're going to enter one of those. So it's a non-perfect process, but in the cases at Harpeth Hall and MBA, as we lay it out as well as we can, get all the inputs we can, and make it as smooth as it possibly can be. But also in an era in the last 5 years, post-COVID, and the test optional era, with most schools still being that, that turned the process wildly more challenging because so many students are applying to places, taking that shot because, hey, I made a low score on the SAT or the ACT, but now they're not going to look at it, so I'm sure they're going to take me. In some cases, they do.
Yeah, it's really interesting how that can figure itself out there in the end. So you alluded to this a little bit in your last answer, and for some, college choice, some argue, should be predicated on career aspiration. And some would say, well, you pick the college so you can, like for instance, you're in education. You looked at two schools that had no sense in doing that. So how much counseling towards a career goal is in your mind, as opposed to the next step is going to be going to whatever four-year institution or whatever institution is there? Colin, since you alluded to that, why don't you take this one?
Yeah, it's part of the process. Mm-hmm. And let me go back in time a little bit. I have worked, like Janet, in other schools in college counseling. And at a school in Ohio, a very common theme there was, I want to go work in engineering. Ohio mm-hmm. was a state where there was a lot of engineering. And frankly, I had to learn myself more about engineering and what those paths might have been. And these were students whose parents worked in engineering and they were exposed to those things. I spent 9 years in Mississippi before moving to Nashville 2 years ago. And the number one thing our students wanted to go do was medicine. They wanted to be doctors or work in that field. Now, that does not mean that we only looked at colleges that had, quote, high acceptance rates for medical school or something like that. But we would talk about the coursework they would need to do, the types of schools where they might do best, where they could get the best research, internship, shadowing opportunities, and then also use what they had in the greater Jackson area. So what students want to study is definitely part of the conversation, but we also know that a substantial number of students will change what they want to study once they get to college. We met with a boy this winter who went off to a well-known SEC school this year, thought he wanted to do engineering. And after 2 weeks, he said, not for me. So he was with us this winter saying, I want to transfer. I just picked the wrong place. I know now what I don't want to do. So especially with students who get a very narrow focus in what they want to do in college, I tend to move methodically and skeptically sometimes towards those, and make sure that if they get to a college and they change what they want to do, that there are going to be opportunities. I've lived it in my own family, with my own child, lived it with my brother, who showed up to a college and had no idea what he wanted to do, did business because that's just what you do. And a semester later, he was in architecture and still works in that. So we go into the process recognizing that, but it is certainly something we talk about. And as a boys' school, you might guess that the most popular thing for our guys is business or finance, even if they can't define what finance is. So
Yeah.
we do talk about that at the small liberal arts school possibilities, the mid-sized research institution, the large public, large private places, and the differences in studying those things there. And again, making sure that there's some variety in what they can do.
So, Janet, kind of along those same lines, you and I talked very briefly through email about Lisa D'Amour's book, Untangled. And
yeah.
one of the interesting things that I think came out of that, and she didn't talk about it very much, was the idea that girls don't think that far ahead necessarily at the 15, 16, 17-year-old stage. I don't know exactly if that's your experience or if that isn't, but how does that relate to career counseling or career conversation as related to where you're going to go to school next year?
Sure. Well, I do think that there are some gender differences in the way that that boys and girls maybe approach the conversation about future career, and so much of that it probably just stems from just generations of expectations that we're still untangling. Not to borrow Lisa D'Amour's language, but I do work with a population of girls that are pretty forward thinking. And so in my experience, I'm quite often working with young women who have in mind a future career. But the thing that I just want to underscore that Colin mentioned about the value of flexibility in your college experience is that, and maybe this is a difference between young men versus young women in their thought process here, is that young women that I work with tend to really understand and value the college experience as a growth moment in and of itself, not necessarily as a portal to career, but as a moment for deepening their education, forming strong relationships, developing their independence, and within that, discovering their ultimate pathway to and through a college major and into a career. I think that, I mean, I'm the product of a liberal arts college, and I find that lately those of us who graduated from them are defending them a bit more, because there is a notion that, and this comes from a really genuine place, that we want our young people to graduate from college with the ability to earn and to survive independently after college. That's very genuine and real. And yet, the college experience is also this very discrete moment in time where you get to learn very deeply how to learn, how to critically think, how to meet with minds that may disagree with you and have that conversation with grace. There's just so much more learning to college than just the career preparation piece. I find that my young women do embrace that piece of the college process as well, even if they have a career in mind on the other side of it.
Gotcha. All right, so let me throw out an experiment here. Let's say, just for the sake of hypotheticals, that I am the father of twins, one boy and one girl, and one of them goes to MBA and one of them goes to Harpeth Hall. Colin, let me start with you. Just if you're talking to me as a parent, given kind of the broad experience of boys at MBA, what should I expect? What kind of phone calls, emails should I be getting as a parent as my son goes through the process? Let's say from sophomore year on, what's this road look like?
Yeah, so thank you for defining the year, because I was first going to say, how old is your child? So in the sophomore year at MBA, similar to Harpeth Hall, you're going to take the PSAT, you're going to be assigned your college counselor, and we're going to have our first family meeting where we tell you, schedule a time where you and At least one parent or guardian needs to be present. And it's a get to know you time. And the focus is not on where you're applying or what you want to study, though we will bring up where are you thinking about, what are you thinking about studying or doing. But it is getting some familiarity with what the process is going to be. You're going to take a practice college test, SAT or ACT, and then we move into the junior year where things really get serious. You have a college planning night for the whole class, as you do in the sophomore year, but a very different focus in the sophomore year where you're looking at sort of the college application overall and some of the trends and things in the U.S. And in the junior year, we have an individual meeting after November 1, because on November 2nd, our lives become much freer. November 1 is a big day in our world. And so we're talking with students in much more detail about where they are looking or where they have visited and the types of schools that we believe, based on the courses they've taken, the grades they've earned, how they've been involved in school and outside of school, that might be appropriate both in terms of culture and community and are realistic in terms of admissions. Because if a student walks in and says, hey, I've been reading U.S. News and World Report, first of all, we vomit. And then we say, okay, those top ones, you can't just apply to those. We got to look at a little more variety. So that process continues, and we actually start the common application in the spring of the junior year. And by the time school starts, theoretically, you've got a rough draft of an essay and much of the application done, and you've got a pretty good idea of where you're applying. And by that time, when you talk about emails, you've been getting some from us, but you're going to be getting a lot from colleges. And it is no secret that students don't necessarily manage email well. And when I look at a student's laptop, when they open it up as seniors, I am shocked by the number of messages they have, especially from colleges who are just spamming them incessantly. Apply here, come here, because a lot of them need to. And as Janet said, she's a product of a small liberal arts college. I am as well. My oldest child went to one. My son is at one right now. They're having to work hard to make sure that they are full, and a lot of them are not. So we're talking about those places and lots of others with our students, and by the fall, the bulk of the work for students is done.
Gotcha. A quick follow-up on that. Just in terms of the boys that you work with, any issues in terms of trying to reel them in to make sure that they stay on task through this process?
No, everybody does everything on time.
Sure.
Not?
Yeah.
Of course.
Yeah.
I worked at co-ed schools for 20 years. Before that, I was in a boys' school for 10 years. And being back in one for 2 years, it took about a week. And I went, oh, okay, I'm back to this. Deadlines are challenging for some guys. They don't as readily just walk in and want to talk about the process as much. I miss that, and we highly encourage it. Please walk in. The door is open. We want to do that. But we learn that we have to initiate those conversations oftentimes. When we ask for input about the process and how things went for students, from students and from parents, the number one thing we hear from students is we need support on essays. It's the most intimidating part of the process outside of whether or not they're going to be admitted somewhere. And they love the check-ins of deadlines. Please remind us more. Hey, this needs to be in at this time. Are you up to date on A, B, and C? And we're doing things deliberately to address those issues. For parents, it's a much broader range of things. Forgive us, we have a wonderful grandfather clock in this room. And every hour it goes off. For the parents, they are much more focused on a broader range of things that we hope for. And like what Janet was saying about sort of the seeking of knowledge and growth in college, parents are much more focused on that. I'm sure my parents were too. I was focused on football and Well, trying to be on a team, which I was, but it hardly played, and whether or not there were women, and maybe not the most intellectual of thoughts at that point.
So, Janet, to you, in terms of, again, I've got a daughter at Harpeth Hall. Let's start at 10th grade or so forth. And what should I expect as a parent? And then also, similarly, does it always go to plan?
No pressure, a future parent. We do things in a very, very similar way to MBA. Our schools partner on some programming as well, particularly when it comes to addressing issues of financial aid and the transition to college for parents, which is also a piece of the process. Not only are the students making a transition in their life, but parents who are launching a child are as well. So we jointly work on that type of programming. But just to backtrack and follow the same timeline that Colin gave you, we also begin, like I mentioned earlier, with very light group programming for the entire class and their parents in 9th grade. The individual counselor assignment comes in the spring of 10th grade for a Harpeth Hall student. We do it a little bit differently than MBA at that point in the process, in that we have the student meet with us one-on-one first, rather than having a family meeting. And the rationale there is that we're really trying to set the girls up to be the driver of their process. We do bring in the family during the junior year, either the parents alone or the family all together, depending on their choices and needs. But that initial conversation is a getting to know you with just the student and her college counselor. I kind of think of it as like, we have this major project to do together and we don't know each other yet. And so you need to know a little bit about me and how I'm going to support you. And I need to know about you and what your goals and aspirations are at this point as you're launching into the process. In junior year, I think we're pretty much lockstep with MBA. I could say exactly the same things that Colin did about the timeline of that process. We engage families in a monthly newsletter that really outlines sort of what to expect in this month for juniors and for seniors, what the parents' responsibilities are, what the students' responsibilities are, and what's on the horizon coming down the pike. So that piece of communication is our touchstone month to month throughout all of junior and senior year. And then in addition to that, as I mentioned earlier, we partner our two schools along with University School of Nashville and Franklin Road Academy on a series of financial aid webinars with our partner at College Money Method, Paul Martin. Paul is extraordinarily knowledgeable and is sort of, in our office, we think of as like the fourth member of our team, because Paul will be specifically addressing at every point during the 4 years of high school what is essential and relevant as it comes to the daunting task of considering college costs. And so that goes 9th through 12th year. And we partner together on that programming. And as Colin said, in senior year, you will hear from us frequently, but your child will hear from us even more frequently. We right now, during the summer, I've already held 7 or 8 meetings with students who want to brainstorm essay ideas and begin that process, or organize their thinking around where they might apply and what application plans they'll use for each of the different colleges. We set the expectation with our students that they will not need to nail down their final college list until we're going into senior year. And even after that point, there is some flexibility. But that is sort of the first meeting of senior year, is what's the plan? And now how will we lay out that plan, and what support will you need along the way? We have some campers coming and going from a side door in my office. So if there's a little background noise, gleeful laughter, that is what you're hearing. But yes, in many ways, our schools do the process with great similarity.
Yeah. And any trouble reeling them in when they kind of get out there?
So it's interesting. This is a point that Colin and I have talked about before. I do feel that there's sort of like an 80-20 rule here. I think probably, 20% of boys are incredibly organized and don't need to have their feet held to the fire. And I'm the parent to a son, so I know this personally in my own home, but and then like 80% of them need some greater degree of direction. And then at Harpeth Hall, I kind of feel like it maybe swings in the opposite direction. 80% of girls respond really well to creating a timeline and being planful about the process, and 20% dodge us, and we have to track them down and maybe engage with their family a little bit more as partners in keeping them organized. So for sure, it does still happen that we need to call for a meeting instead of responding to a request for a meeting, or bring a student in and say, hey, I haven't heard from you in several weeks. Where are we on these things? But the majority of my students, it's the other way around. They're coming to my door when I have free time and asking for a few minutes to touch base of their own accord. So I'm fortunate in that way. They're pretty on the ball.
Colin, let me just give you a chance to rebut. Is that true? 80-20 perhaps?
I was doing the math in my head and sort of seeing the guys from the class of 2025. Like, okay, would that be accurate? It's not far off. I'll put it that way.
All right.
And there are those students, particularly our highest achievers, who are pretty on the ball. Was having a conversation with a colleague this morning about one, and he knows where he wants to apply. It's right out of U.S. News, and okay, we need to have some other possibilities in there. But for most, that's not the conversation we're having just yet in July. I'm sitting here reflecting on my own experience too. I would love to think that college counseling is what I thought it was when I entered education in 1993, that we were the ones telling a student where to apply and then working very closely with them to decide where to go. And we suggest for students places to apply. And hopefully Janet has the magic touch where students go, hey, Mrs. Weller, I think that's a great idea. You've been doing this a long time. You know where I should apply. I'm going to apply to all of those. I've had a tougher time with that over the years. I get some who take those suggestions, who visit them. And even if they find that, nope, it's not the right place for me, go, hey, but at least I saw it and I know what it was like. Ultimately, in this process, we don't have as much influence on that as we would like. And then choosing where to go, I don't want to speak for Janet. I can tell you I would have a lot more guys choose to go to smaller places where they are names and not numbers, which is my fear for a lot of boys. But I don't have that power. And especially in the social media era, when students see how exciting larger schools are and what goes on, the SEC network is not showing up to a school of 1,500 kids anytime soon. But man, on Saturdays, even when I turn on ESPN or the SEC network, it sure looks fun. It looks so different from my own college experience. I go, yeah, I think I could do that. So generally, yeah, what she's talking about is pretty accurate.
Okay, all right. So I've got a question related to that later on. We'll really get to. When I organized this podcast, I didn't have this question in mind, and so Janet, you're going to get this, and feel free to dodge it if you want to.
Okay.
But about a week or so after we agreed to do this, my 7-year-old said, "Hey, Dad, teach me how to play golf." And so I thought, hey, that's really interesting. I don't play that often, but all right, sure. So we got her a little putter, and we went out to a practice putting green near our house. And there were some young boys out there. and one of them they were playing putting games, and one of them whispered under his breath, "This putt to win the Masters." And I just had this very nostalgic moment of my dad taking me out on the putting green years ago, and having that same kind of thing. And I realized very much so in that moment that even if my daughter were to become a professional golfer, she's never going to say those words, because women are not allowed at the Masters as of yet. And so my question is really sort of, as you counsel and as you coach young women in terms of the world that they're going into, do you talk about glass ceilings? Do you talk about the good old boys club, which of course is prevalent all over the place? Or is it just, look, the world is yours. How do you manage that, if you do?
This is a great question. I love this question. And I think it is my privilege working in all girls education all these years. This is the third of 3 institutions that I've worked in that are traditionally female serving, that we get a platform to develop young women leaders starting, at Harpeth Hall in 5th grade. And so, yes, we talk about the world that they are entering, but I think it doesn't initiate in the college counseling office that we're talking about that. They are being built for or encouraged toward their success navigating in a co-educational world from the time they begin as Harpeth Hall students. We talk a lot about young women's confidence. We have a confidence club. I may or may not, in my first public announcement as the new director at Harpeth Hall 4 years ago, have power posed on stage before the PSAT to remind girls to make themselves large and to take up space. So we do have those conversations, but I think it's part of a larger and ongoing conversation that's happening here. The question that you pose is real. The world does still, despite lots and lots of progress, look different to young women entering the workforce than it does to young men in some fields more than others. But I don't know that the conversation and the preparation for that can start with the college conversation. I think it also needs partners throughout all of education and also at home. So I hope that helps to address the question. It is something that we pay attention to for sure.
Yeah. Yeah, Colin, let me kind of show ask the less ignorant question of mine, because it's my own perspective, and I think your experience and my experience sound to be relatively the same in terms of coming out of high school and going into college. I kind of always looked at the world as anything is possible, and was never given any sort of restriction around that. In terms of how you look at young boys and what they are capable of in the world, and how does that relate in terms of, if at all, in terms of how you look at college, post-college, business? Like I said, a lot of your boys looking at business and finance because that is a place where men have traditionally dominated.
It is, and we can't forget the places where Janet and I work. These are places that we are privileged to show up to each day. Mm-hmm. We have facilities and resources and opportunities that lots of independent schools don't have, and that lots of other schools across the country can't fathom. And as recently as yesterday, I was with a new student who is coming from another school in Tennessee, public school, that is such a different experience from what we have. The assumptions we have for our students, the assumption that they can go do anything, is fairly real. the parameters that students may put on themselves are often self-imposed. That and I go back to my own experience. Uh, I knew after volunteering at a hospital, I didn't want to be around blood that much. I don't want to do it. I also had some idea of what the study of becoming a physician might be, and I didn't really want to stay in school that long. But I knew because of the neighborhood I was in, the people I was around, the schools I attended, especially after moving to an independent school in the middle of ninth grade, that, boy, there are opportunities out there that I could be part of that I didn't know existed, didn't know that they were there, and I could do this, like working in a private school myself. So I think our guys come to MBA with eyes wide open at what the opportunities may be. And we're not starting the conversations of careers early, but we are equipping them with the academic, the personal experiences, the character to succeed in whatever they may go do. And the reality for a lot of boys is that they will get to college and recognize there are so many other fields and opportunities that we never imagined possible. And hopefully they're going to be confident enough to follow those roads. And I can say, for going back to what Janet was talking about earlier and with girls, there is some inherent unfairness in the way our country and our world have operated in regards to gender since probably the beginning of time. Fortunately, some of those ceilings are being broken and some of those walls are being knocked down, but it's slow. What we do know is that girls are going to college at a higher rate. They are doing better in college. They are doing better in high school. They are taking more leadership opportunities. And the way we teach is much more geared towards how girls learn. And they are doing well in school. And finally, companies, colleges, and others are recognizing that. And I'm a huge Warren Buffett fan. And it was he who said, when, in the 70s, when we finally started getting more women in the workplace, hey, half of the possibilities out there haven't been there because we haven't been letting them, or they have, been tied to the home. And boom, our nation is taking off, and they're doing great things. So we're coming from, again, a place of privilege where our students see the world as their oyster. And we try to encourage that. But making sure that they understand there have to be some guardrails around that too.
Gotcha. Excellent. All right. So let's move into kind of more differences, if we can possibly single them out. Janet, let me just, as girls, as young women get from sophomore year to junior year to senior year, middle of senior year, the pressure gets cranked up quite a bit. How do girls respond to pressure?
Not always well. Mm-hmm. So you mentioned Lisa D'Amour earlier. I have her book on my table. Mm-hmm. And one thing that I really appreciate that she highlights in her work is the fact that some degree of stress is to be expected and is actually healthy and motivational. Mm-hmm. And so we try to introduce that idea to the girls early and often, and also help put some guardrails up for them so that they are protected from the worst types of stress. We have this is going to sound really corny, but we have an expression at Harpeth Hall. You may have already heard it. Bears don't compare. And one of the chief sources of that stress and pressure does come from the comparison piece, where girls will look at their peers around them and allow someone else's success to steal their own joy. And we work really hard to combat that. In the college process, we do that by really emphasizing that everyone's process is individualized. The girls have created, in partnership with us, a culture here of not really discussing their process in a competitive or comparative way with one another. They keep it pretty private and then celebrate collectively when their decisions have been made, rather than engaging in this sort of competitive stress of like, oh, you think you had a long list of supplemental essays to write? Well, let me tell you about mine. We try really hard to tamp that down, and it'll bubble up throughout the year. But when it does, we try and kind of gather them back together and remind them of a set of collective agreements that they make at the beginning of the process. At the end of the summer, we bring all of the seniors together and have a college workshop, and a portion of that time is spent creating some collective agreements on how they will treat one another in the process. And periodically, we have to remind them of that, and that they're only hurting themselves by engaging in that type of comparison. But for sure, the pressure does mount. We do a survey, an alumni survey, and we also do some internal sort of balance surveys. And interestingly, the results have shown that the girls' source of pressure is overwhelmingly themselves. And I think as a parent, you think, oh, it's going to be me. They're going to say I'm putting the pressure on them. But they are internalizing stuff maybe that they're seeing around them, but they're reporting out that they are their own worst enemy. And so we try really hard to set them up for success, and to just kind of open their eyes to where those sources, where those voices might be coming from that influence them to put that pressure on.
Gotcha. Colin, same question to you. And I had a chance to watch the PBS documentary Raising Cain, which I don't know if you've seen or have read the book. Basically, it's a couple of psychologists that kind of did a great deal of research on raising boys and how boys have been treated all along. And one of the things that it came up with is that they were talking with boys that were 17, 18 in that senior year or getting ready for that senior year. And one of the things that they were surprised by is that boys can be, and this is a quote, boys can be so ready 1 minute and then completely not the next. How do you see that? And especially as it relates to the pressure of trying to figure out what's going to happen after senior year.
Yeah, I don't have a response to the so ready minute and not the next idea, but I do, and how boys react to stress and to pressure. We use the word process. Say, let's process what's going on. Let's talk about what's going on. It is not the majority of boys who, when something goes wrong, that want to discuss it. Often the response is quiet. Yeah. Hey, let me deal with this.
That was also discussed at length in the documentary. Yeah.
Anger.
Yeah.
And how that comes out is often quiet and pulling back from wanting to be around others or talk about things. As I said earlier, we try to be a place where we want to be open to those conversations, but when bad things happen, we often have to deliberately pull boys in. And sometimes are criticized if we don't do it or don't do it soon enough when something bad happens. And often we're not even told when something bad happens. Hey, I didn't get into 3 schools or something when the decisions came out. And they don't immediately run to their college counselor and say, hey, this is what happened. I was laughing on the inside and smiling on the outside when Janet talked about bears don't compare. I love the phrase. The big red compares, and they compare a lot. And my office is across the hall from a senior lounge, an area where you'll have on some days 3 and on some days 18 guys hanging out, and then 2 college counselors who are officed right in that space. So they hear everything. And the boys talk as if the counselors are non-existent. So sometimes we have to rein in the discussion, but the talking about where they're applying, what they want to do, it's nonstop. And we tell them, we are not going to discuss your applications with anyone else. If you walk in and say, hey, Mr. Dunnigan, I'm applying to X, I'm not going to say, oh, you're applying there. So are 3 other guys. You should go talk to them about it. It's their business. You share what you want to share. Our guys share, the majority share plenty. And I don't think that's necessarily a good thing, because it does build some resentment, some concern, and we end up with phone calls and emails that go, hey, I heard that 9 other guys are applying to X school, and what's going to happen there, and is he disadvantaged? And there's some building up of some expectations or fears that don't need to be realized, don't need to be worried about. So overall, the spirit of competition here is strong. The loudest I have heard our gym outside of a basketball game in the last 2 years was the Integral B. This is a mathematics competition, and the finalists do their math in front of the entire student body and faculty. It's 1,000 people, and the applause is deafening. It is so exciting. And that's just guys. And that's the cool thing about being in a boys' school, that the camaraderie built around David and Arish being really good at integrals is a lot of fun. That carries over sometimes to the college piece. And sometimes we have to work on dialing back those discussions when we can.
Gotcha. Moving on, and this is the other question that may be a little bit prickly, because I know that, I mean, I've been in secondary education for a couple of years, and I've understood this as well. So I'm going to temper the question here a bit, but that is responding to parents, and that's obviously a part of it, especially when you're talking about schools like the ones that both of you work at. And obviously we know there are parents out there that are going to be demanding. I get that. And I'm going to step away from that, in asking the question, but in terms of how they need to best fit into how their child is going to make decisions. Janet, first to you, what is the best course of action? Average parent, we're not talking about the helicopter or the tiger mom or whatever you want to enable it as, but what's the best course of action for a parent dealing with young women trying to make that decision?
Yeah. We talk a lot about this in our parent meetings, so you have that to look forward to. Well, I'm fond of the idea of setting aside designated time where the student will fill their parents in on the college process. And then outside of that designated time, let her take the lead. If she wants to raise a question, that is her prerogative. But outside of that designated time, if she needs silence or for you to just trust that the process is going okay, that it goes a long way when that can be honored. And a lot of our families have reported back that they have set that up and that it's worked really well for their family. They get the information they need because the student has agreed during this time, I will tell you what's going on. But other than that time, please trust me that I have this. And so I think it's very challenging, I think, as a parent to not, because up to this point, you've had some like pretty significant say in the choices that your child makes. And as the person who is probably funding the college process, there may be also some expectations that are set there. We encourage families to have that conversation early so that it does not stymie the process on the back end. But allowing that independence goes such a long way. And the number of students that have navigated this process independently and then really felt ownership when they make their choice, with their parents' support and not at loggerheads, it sets them up for so much greater success, I think. I do think that parents have a role of support in this part of the process, but the ownership going to the child makes such a big difference in how they feel ultimately about the choice that they're making, whether that's college or some other pathway beyond high school. Um, you know, as Colin and I have both said, at our schools, the majority of those choices are to go on to college. But for some students, taking time away from school, taking a gap year, um, you know, joining the military, following another pathway is going to be the right fit for them. And if that's their choice and their parents have supported them in making that choice, um, they come away from high school feeling like they've earned that independence.
Gotcha. Colin, same question to you in terms of responding to parents. You remember you said the Big Red compares. Big Red's parents could also compare too. I imagine that could be difficult as well. But how do you see what is the right frame of mind a parent should be in when it comes to helping their kid take ownership, perhaps, of that decision, as well as you mentioned earlier, helping them stay on course and reel them in when they're out and about and not necessarily staying on task in terms of what's coming up next?
Yeah. And every child, quite literally, is different.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm not going to answer it in a stereotypical gender specific way.
Sure.
But I'll start with my own family. My oldest child, who's now 25 and working in Boston and living on her own, doing great. Her process was in large part due to my wife, and they're very close. And my daughter uses a wheelchair, so we needed to look at schools where she could get around well and that were going to be appropriately challenging for her. She's a good student. And they went through that process beautifully. But boy, my daughter she was driving a lot of it and diligent and task oriented. And when she ultimately decided where she was going to apply, it was an early decision. And the college counselor she had, my colleague at our prior school, said, Morgan, if you don't get in, you need to have your essays and everything ready to send if it doesn't happen. And she said, oh, yeah, it's all loaded in the Common App. But, if I don't get in, I'll be sad that night. The next day I'll hit send on everything. Oh, thank you. And our son is very different. He wanted to play a sport in college, he thought, and he still does. He's on a team, but he took a lot more pushing and had to be coaxed more gently sometimes and not pushed, and help come to decisions about places that were going to be appropriate for him. And my wife also had to write down deadlines and put them on his mirror in his bathroom. And it said everything by these dates, or you have no allowance and you don't have a job, so you're not going to drive that car. So they're just different. So as a parent, she did a great job. And my daughter had a classmate in high school who said, wow, you're so lucky your dad's a college counselor. I bet you talk about college every night. And she said, no, we don't. It has its place. I wrote down what Janet said about the designated time to fill in parents on the process. I love that. We are both fortunate to be at schools where the students are driving the process. And we hear from parents, but not a lot. And over time, in my career, it's been based on the culture of the school as to whether parents are highly involved. Parents do not show up unannounced here. They do not walk in our office and say, hey, can I talk about blank? I worked at 2 other schools where it happened regularly, and that's uncomfortable. And we get emails asking questions, and we're always happy to respond to those. If you're the parent who sends 175 of those messages, yes, it has happened. Yes, we've counted. That becomes a problem. That does not happen regularly. And we try to make sure that we're involving parents in communication, but we also, and I'm happy to admit it, we get criticized if we under communicate to parents. And frankly, we are a place that does we communicate our college work with boys first, and then parents sort of as needed. And sometimes it's not enough. And that's something that we are looking at for this year to make sure that we're appropriately including them. Because, as Janet said, probably the parents who are going to write the check and will have some say in what happens. My parents did not leave my process entirely up to me. They left a lot of it up to me. And it was a 17-year-old guy who was not overly focused on what this process should be about. God bless them. They had a lot of confidence in their son's ability, where maybe it was misplaced. But with our guys, we don't know the conversations going on at home, but we assume that there are a lot.
Gotcha. Definitely good food for thought there. So both of you have, as Malcolm Gladwell would say, put in your 10,000 hours in being college counselors. So I feel confident in asking this next to last question. Have you ever been surprised in the process at any point? And over your tenure, how has the college counseling, career counseling landscape changed for you, if at all, with girls and or boys? Janet?
Oh my gosh, I don't know that I can sum up how it has changed because it's been dramatic. I'm going into year 25 in the work of college counseling. And the landscape, even in just that 25 years, has changed pretty dramatically, right, Colin? I mean, like we've gone from, all you need to do is look at a graph of admit rates to see how the landscape has changed. In broad strokes, it is more competitive than it ever has been to get into college writ large. However, the group of colleges that we're focused on when we think about that landscape change is actually quite narrow. The majority of students are still getting into college if they wish to go, generally speaking, across the landscape. Have I been surprised? Yes. I'm like, this feels like a softball to say, but COVID surprised all of us.
Mm-hmm.
I just think back to how we anticipated that the colleges would respond and that how high schools would have to pivot. I hate that word now, but there it is. And so many things did not unfold the way that we thought that they would. So I guess, although it was a surprise in almost every profession, that was also a moment of greatest surprise for me. And also, I guess, somewhat surprising how things have unfolded since the pandemic as well. I'm thinking of things like in the moments that we were first returning to our offices in person and rejoining with our students in person and thinking we're never going back to colleges requiring testing. And that has already started to shift. Although, as Colin mentioned earlier, the majority of schools remain test optional. There are some that we thought would maybe abandon it permanently that have not decided to do that. So yeah, for sure, there have been surprises along the way. And there probably will be again. I think we have to be in our profession nimble and knowledgeable, and so like keeping an eye on that broader landscape is a big part of the job, and not just narrowly thinking about just the student that's in front of you, although that is the overwhelming majority of the work, but also, being in conversation with colleagues, being aware of the broader landscape of college admission. And as we've both mentioned several times, being aware of what this process looks like in environments that are not like Harpeth Hall or MBA, that helps us inform our work and then better support our students as well.
Colin, to you, in terms of, have you been surprised over the course of your career, and has anything really dramatically changed, or what has changed, to put it that way, over the course of your career?
Yeah, we get surprises all the time, and usually it's around admission decisions. And when I started this, I remember some of my first presentations to students and parents talking about. I would give an example of a school that was really high priced and say blank is $40,000 a year. My God! And now it is $94,000 a year. So the cost is nutty, and admit rates and the fascination with rankings, although rankings don't drive many of the decisions for kids at our school. Thankfully, I don't hear the words U.S. News and World Report college rankings regularly at all. And I've, in 2 years here, never seen a kid carry that around. Maybe they're looking
Thank
at
goodness.
it online. Yeah, thank goodness. The surprises we have now are who gets in and who doesn't. And Janet alluded to it. All you have to do is look at the charts. And we were at a conference 2 weeks ago where on the screen are the charts showing admit rates and how they have gone down. And while we are at schools where our admit rates overall are very favorable compared to local and national averages, it has a material effect when at the University of Tennessee, 17,000 people were applying there 8 years ago, and now it's over 60,000. And when the number of applications at Duke result in low single-digit admit rates, rates so low that I would love for them to be the interest rate on my home. But that's how many kids they're taking. So it's just shocking. And the test optional movement, I love it. And to see schools bring it back, I also understand it, because I think the issue with a lot of these places is they are overwhelmed with numbers. These are schools that are hiring 25, 50, 100 people to help read applications. And AI it's an amazing tool, but it's going to change how things operate in college admissions. I had a person recently, not going to name the school, he said, we're starting to talk about doing away with the college essay. It's a very well-known school. Really? He said, no, it's not like we're talking about it, a lot. But we just recognize that between counselors, parents, consultants, and AI, is that essay really a kid's work? Often for our schools, kids get a lot of support with those essays. They're still the voice of 17 and 18-year-olds, but we want them to be quality products. And that kind of change at some point, could it happen? Yes.
That's a scary proposition as well. And just to that, I have several other questions which I would love to get to, but I think that we're going to run out of time, or maybe we can have a second edition of this at some point. So let me just open it up to you and just say, Janet, is there anything that we haven't covered here, though I have many topics, that you would like to talk about before we move on?
I can't think of anything immediately off of the top of my head that we haven't touched upon. I've loved this conversation though, and the idea of a follow-up is actually a great one. I think that if there's anything that I would say, I would just say that having conversation around not even just the difference between how boys and girls approach this process, but just how as the adults who are around those families can help support the process. I just think that's so valuable. And I think having the two of us represent a boys' school and a girls' school is a really nice balance to have for this conversation. But the voice that is not in the room is the voice of the student who does not attend a school with as robust internal support as our two programs are able to provide. And so if there's one thing that I would emphasize that we haven't touched on, it's that that this is not how the process looks for families that have limited means. This is not how the process looks for students who lack parental support at home to help guide them, to help encourage them. And so I would encourage that voice in the conversation as well to help represent a really well-rounded view of how families are experiencing the college going process and the choice of career. I think that's important.
That's on the docket, and that's the purpose
Excellent.
of the podcast. So that's definitely there as well. Colin, anything that you'd like to add?
Man, good job, Janet. Sort of wrapping my brain for other stuff. What she said at the end is so important. I've said it once or twice here. We're so fortunate to work where we are and in with the communities that we have that are so supportive and will not only want to do the things that we might suggest, they'll do them. And they have the capacity, the wherewithal, the connections to do things that the majority of students in this country cannot. The college process does look so different here for what it does in small rural places and far less resourced schools and districts. And colleges, some of the most well-funded ones are recognizing that. And there is, including at Vanderbilt, a group of schools that are focusing on trying to get students from small town. When I say stars, it's deliberately small town and rural scholars or schools, maybe using the wrong last word there. But it is a process that our students are well supported in at our places. And for students who come from backgrounds different from ours, it is a totally different one and a scary one. And what we assume is normal is more broadly not normal. And to focus on that at some time in the future would be fantastic.
Hey, Bill Priestley here with a great opportunity for you guys as parents to help your kids figure out what they want to do with their lives by getting some inside information. It's a new webinar we're putting out once a month. Go to dreamjobfactory.com/webinar and you'll learn things such as when to talk to your kids, what to talk to them about, and what you can expect as parents in the growth process from going from a teenager to a self-supporting adult. Again, that's dreamjobfactory.com/webinar. Go there now, sign up. We'll see you online. Time now for our Pathfinder's Backpack. 5 questions for Janet Weller and Colin Dunnigan, talking at least today about the differences between boys and girls in terms of the college counseling process. But 5 questions we give to everybody. Are you ready for them?
Let's go.
All right.
Ready.
Janet, I'll give you the first one first. What is one book every student under 18 should read before they make a career-related decision?
And this book is on its face a bit more about college choice, but I recommend Frank Bruni's Where You Go Is Not Who You'll Be. I'm fond of reminding students that they make the college experience what it is so much more than the college does, and that this is a book that really emphasizes that point. I've recently noticed a term being used by college wellness offices that I really love, and that term is flourishing. And in the way that wellness is not simply the absence of illness, flourishing is not the same thing as being well. It's thriving, right? And the emphasis in Bruni's book is that you should go where you will flourish, regardless of the name of that place, and how you flourish will be the thing that sets you up for success.
Gotcha. Colin, what's your book?
So I mentioned earlier, I'm a fan of Warren Buffett, and there are lots of books about him, but there's one called Tap Dancing to Work. And that does not mean that every person has to become Warren Buffett. It does not mean everyone has to go become a genius stock picker, but hopefully they would see through him a person who loves what he does and is wired for what he does. And that if no matter the career you choose, you hope that someone is going to wake up, whether it's their first year or in my case, their 33rd year in that work, and feel good about going to do what they do. So I heard about him in 1993, later than a lot of people, and started reading about him and have to this day. And I would encourage people to do that.
All right, those are two good selections. Colin, we'll flip it and go you first here. What is one experience every person should have before they go into the real world to take on that first full-time position?
Get in to shadow somebody in a career or career fields that you want to do. And we are blessed to be at schools where the connections in fields from everything from medicine and science to business and engineering are vast. Use that opportunity, use those opportunities to see what really goes on. In my case, I was able to visit schools, not just as a student, but as an observer, as a helper when I was late in high school, and I knew, yep, this is what I want to be doing. Please get in and see what really goes on in those careers. I had a conversation with a student yesterday who had been in an operating room and held part of someone's bicep tendon last week and knew, hey, this is cool. Orthopedic surgery is for me.
Okay. Janet, what's that one experience?
Work in food service. Well, really, I mean, work in any kind of service, retail, waiting tables, volunteering in a soup kitchen. Do something that teaches you servant leadership. Waiting tables taught me so much about time management and how to talk to people and how to stand up for myself and how to handle my own finances. But it also taught me how valuable it is to take care of others. It's valuable to them and valuable to you.
Gotcha. All right, flip it back again to Janet first. What is one task you would really appreciate students undertaking before beginning the process of going after a specific career path?
Well, I'm going to echo Colin here. I think seek mentorship or feedback from someone in that career, and ideally someone who will be completely impartial to your pursuit of it. So meaning not exclusively hearing it from a parent or a close relative who works in that industry. So that could mean reaching out for opportunities, like Colin said, to job shadow, or maybe just asking for a call with a professor in the field or to speak to someone who teaches in that area when you're touring the college. And the purpose is to know beyond the hype what's really involved in the job. Students often tell me that they don't want a desk job, but they've based their whole view of corporate law on what they see on Suits, the TV show. And then they're surprised at how much time they'll spend at a desk. And if we're talking about higher education being the beginning of that process, then another important task is really to read the course catalog. I'll add that on to my answer. Future nurses, for example, romanticize the human elements of the job without considering how much more STEM classes they're going to have to take. And it's not just to the point of their degree. They're going to have continuing education throughout their career as well. So read your course catalogs.
Absolutely. Colin, real quick before you jump to that, at a point where I'll leave it for that. Colin, what is your answer when it comes to the one task you would really appreciate students undertaking?
I would love them to have a job. And Janet mentions food service, and I smile like, yeah, that's a great thing to do. But to have the responsibility of having to show up, to be accountable to someone else, to having to deal with others or tasks that have to be completed, and someplace that depends upon their work to succeed and to move forward and to do well. To wait until someone is 20 or 21 to be held accountable for doing some work and learning those duties of having to be on time and be prepared and do things properly, I think it's too long. So I know through my own children, having to be responsible for something like that has been an eye-opening and a positive thing. And I would hope others would do the same as well.
All right. Number 4 for you, Colin, first. What is one thing you would tell a student to not do when trying to choose a career path?
To do the thing that is just going to earn them the most money possible. There are There are lots of people, and I'm thinking particularly law, who go into that field, and I talk with the parents here where they have gone into that because they thought maybe it was going to be one thing, or they thought they would make good fees, and they go, I am miserable. I will not let my child go into law. You want to wake up every day ready to tap dance to work. And was I going to make Warren Buffett money as a Spanish teacher? No, but I really enjoyed it. And I'm still in education because I really enjoy it. So do not just look at the finances when it comes to choosing a path.
Janet, what's one thing you would tell a student not to do?
I would put a little bit of a twist on a quite similar answer. And I think this is hard for young people to do when they're young and forward thinking, but I encourage students not to ignore the building blocks and the value of the steps on their path. Don't be discouraged if the first job that you secure is not your dream job. I read an article, I think it was an NBC story or an article a few months ago that reported that approximately, I think it was to the tune of 30 to 40K students graduating from college reported a difference in what they believed they would earn at an entry-level job versus what they actually get offered. And young people are idealistic, and that's so wonderful, and we don't want to destroy that. But I also think that they want to be able to go from 0 to 60 as soon as they graduate when it comes to career. And there are still growing years ahead of them in most cases before they get there, even after they enter into the workforce, not just at college.
All right. Last one for you, Janet, first. What is one gift, tangible or intangible, that you would give someone starting the process of choosing a career path?
I want to say something simple like a pen, because what I really want to say sounds so cheesy, but patience and a listening ear are the real gift. When your student approaches you with questions or an idea, be open-minded and listen to their reasoning without judgment. Sometimes the ideas are going to sound really wild at first. My son has gone from wanting to be a Lego engineer to wanting to be a voice actor within the space of about 6 months. Now he's only about to be 13, so a little younger than the group that we're talking about. But with some open-minded inquiry, there's always a kernel in there that might illuminate the true path. Ask high-quality questions. Tell me more is a better prompt than are you sure?
Colin, what is that one gift you would like to give?
Both of our children did a program that our college counseling software used to have called U-Science. And with my oldest child in particular, she did it when she was in college. And she had done something before college that was okay, but it's a little tool used online to help figure out what careers and major paths might be there. And the report we got for her was so neat that we had discussions about something she might study that we had never talked about. And she ended up getting a degree in that. Now, she got degrees in economics and computer science, but computer science we've never talked about. And it was wonderful to see that if she had gone into careers like a parent's, education and social work, she would have been miserable to know what her personality and the way that she operates and thinks would have been. But doing that was a wonderful opportunity for her to learn more about herself. And we had our son do it as well. And it confirmed many of the same things that we thought we knew, but it was nice to have that affirmation.
Shortly after we got done with our recording, we all decided that this podcast really did need a follow-up in the not-too-distant future. So look for parts 2 and 3 coming up later, one of them strictly for girls and the other strictly for boys. I'm sure it'll be a conversation worth watching. But what we did discuss was that there are differences between young women and men in their attitudes about the future and in the landscape they see as they make the decisions concerning life after school. In further conversations, we'll dive deeper into those differences with some generalities and try to see if there are any different strategies parents should take when their male and female children start looking at their long-term professional lives. Till next time, I'm Bill Priestley.
The Launch Sequence is the official podcast of the Dream Job Factory. For more information, check out our website at dreamjobfactory.com, where you can view all of the tools we have to help your child identify a life path. You can also sign up for our newsletter to get the latest podcasts and information in the career discernment space for young people. We also invite you to join our Facebook page at facebook.com/The Dream Job Factory. This has been The Launch Sequence, giving your kids the keys to launch their careers.